Hi friends, and our next topic is morbidity measures. Right, morbidity measures. In morbidity measures, you have incidence and you have prevalence. Right. Let's know what is incidence here. Incident is defined as number of new cases occurring in a defined population during a specific period of time. That means defined as number of new cases occurring in a defined population during a specific period of time. For a given period, incidence, if you take number of new cases of a disease in a year by total population at risk. Suppose if there are 1,000 population persons at risk of TB, number of new cases of disease in the year by total population at risk in 2000 is incidence. Right? Incidence is rate, means numerator part of denominator expressed per 1000. It is incidence is expressed per 1000. What are the special type of incidence rate? Right, the special types of incidence rates are, right, what are the special types of incidence rate? The special types of incidence rates are, one is attack rate. Right, what is attack rate? Attack rate is incidence rate used when population is exposed for a small interval of time. That means incidence rate, attack rate is an incidence rate. Right, it is an incidence rate used when the population is exposed for a small interval of time. For a small epidemic, example epidemic, only a small interval of time the population is exposed. So what is secondary attack rate? The secondary attack rate is number of exposed persons. Right, I repeat once again, secondary attack rate is the number of exposed persons developing the disease within the range of incubation period. What is that? It is a number of exposed person. It is a number of exposed person. Why it is number of exposed person developing the diseases within the range of incubation following exposure to primary case. That means what is secondary attack rate? Secondary attack rate is a number of exposed person. That means if there are 1,000 people, number of exposed person developing the diseases, out of 1,000, 100 have developing the diseases within the range of incubation following exposure to the primary case. Primary case is the first person or the primary person where he is the primary causes. That means the secondary guys are getting it from the primary case. Primary case is the main primary one. What is incidence is the best measure of disease frequency in etiological studies. Incidence can be determined from cohort study. In the next session we will be knowing what is cohort study, what is case control study. Not of confusing here. Just remember that incidence is the best measure of disease frequency in etiological studies. It's the best measure. Prevalence is a prevalence. Okay, this we are speaking about the incidence. Incidence can be determined from cohort study. What is prevalence? Prevalence is total current. Prevalence is old plus new cases in a given population over a point or period of time. Types of prevalence: a point of time, it is point prevalence. A period of time, it is period prevalence. So let's see the prevalence. Prevalence is a number of total, that is new plus old cases of disease in a year by total population into 100. Right, it is a number of total in the sense new plus old. Right, you got number of total, that is new plus old cases of a disease in a year by total population into 100. Right, by total population, number of new cases plus old cases, both the cases you are involving at this point of view into 100. What is prevalence? Prevalence is a proportion, means prevalence is not a ratio. Prevalence is not a ratio. Why it is not ratio? Because the numerator is part of denominator. Like denominator is telling it has both the new plus old cases is a part of denominator. Numerator is a part of denominator and is always expressed in percentage. Right, it is always expressed in percentage. Prevalence can be determined from, it can be determined from cross sectional studies. How it is determined? It is determined, the prevalence can be determined from cross sectional studies. Cross sectional study, how it is, what is the cross sectional studies? Prevalence can be determined from cross sectional studies, but the incidence from the new from the total population number of new cases. Incidence is total number of new cases by exposed, a new plus old by total number of population into 100. Prevalence is percentage, P for percentage. Remember, P for percentage, it is expressed 100, right? Prevalence can be determined and is expressed always expressed in percentage, that is expressed in 1000, right? It is expressed in thousands, and this is total population. It is a determined form. It is prevalence is it's not a ratio since it is a part of this, so this is a rate, right? It is incidence is a rate, this is a proportion. Why it is a rate? It is a new by exposed in new plus old by total population, that was 100, so I cannot tell it is rate, it is a proportion, that was 1000, so it is rate, right? What is the relationship between the incidence and the prevalence? Given the assumption that population is stable and incidence and duration are unchanging. What is the prevalence? Prevalence equal to incidence into mean duration of what is the prevalence? Prevalence equal to incidence into mean duration of diseases, PID. It is P, please give your ID, PID. Incidence into mean duration of disease, mean duration of disease. Prevalence describes balance between incidence, mortality and recovery. Incidence reflects causal factors, duration reflects the prognostic factors. So the prevalence in the form of formula, you got prevalence equal to incidence, prevalence equal to incidence into mean duration of diseases, PID. Then prevalence describes, what does the prevalence? Prevalence describes a balance between, right? It balance between incidence. There is a balance between incidence, mortality and recovery. There is a describes a balance. It describes the balance between, right? It describes the balance between incidence, right? There is a balance between, yes, there is an incidence, there is a mortality and recovery. Prevalence describes, what does prevalence does? Prevalence describes a balance